In the summer of 1940, the Royal Air Force had two single-seat fighters standing between Britain and a German invasion. History remembers one of them. It was not the one that did most of the work. Post-war analysis of Fighter Command's combat records settled the question. The Hawker Hurricane was credited with roughly 60% of the RAF's confirmed kills in the Battle of Britain, a larger share than the Spitfire, and more than every ground-based anti-aircraft battery combined. It flew in 32 of the RAF's fighter squadrons that summer. The Spitfire equipped 19 AW. The Hurricane got there by a decision that broke every rule of aircraft procurement. In March 1936, before the Air Ministry had placed a single order, Hawker's board authorized production tooling for 1,000 aircraft at company expense. 3 months later, the first contract arrived. For 600, the gamble put Hurricanes in the air in numbers no committee would have approved in time. That head start helped decide the battle. The credit went elsewhere. To understand why, begin with the feature that led contemporary engineers to call the design obsolete before it entered service. That feature was its skeleton. Sidney Cam, Hawker's chief designer, built the Hurricane around a frame of steel tubes braced in the Warren Truss pattern, the same construction method he had used on the Hawker Fury, a fabric-covered biplane of the previous decade. Over that steel frame, the rear fuselage was covered not in metal but in doped Irish linen. In an age moving toward the stressed skin, all-metal monoplane, Cam had bolted a modern engine and a retractable undercarriage onto what was, structurally, the last biplane by the standards of 1940. This was a generation behind. The rival Supermarine Spitfire used a stressed metal skin that carried aerodynamic load and allowed a thinner, faster wing. The Hurricane's fabric and tube belonged to the workshops of the 1920s. Engineers said so plainly. And they were not wrong. They were also not seeing the whole ledger. That obsolete construction was cheap, and it was fast. A Hurricane took roughly 10,000 man-hours to build. A Spitfire took closer to 15,000. When cannon fire tore through the linen rear fuselage, it often punched a clean hole and passed straight out the other side, leaving the structure intact. Ground crews repaired the damage with a patch of fabric and a brush of dope, a fix measured in hours, not days. That difference would matter more than any engineer predicted, because the aircraft was about to be thrown into a fight for national survival. That fight came first to France. When Germany launched its Western Offensive in May 1940, RAF Hurricane squadrons were already deployed on the continent, and they were thrown against the Luftwaffe in the open. The cost was severe. In under 2 weeks of fighting, Fighter Command lost close to 200 Hurricanes over France and the Low Countries, a quarter of the entire home defense strength spent before the decisive battle had even begun. Then came Dunkirk. Between late May and early June, more than 300,000 Allied soldiers were evacuated from the beaches. But the British Army left its equipment behind, its tanks, its guns, its transport, abandoned in the sand and the surf. The army that was supposed to defend the home islands came back, stripped to the men who carried themselves. That left the arithmetic starkly simple. If Germany was to invade across the Channel, it first had to control the air above it. Standing against the largest air force on Earth was a fighter command depleted by the French campaign, short of aircraft and shorter still of trained pilots. The decisive phase opened in July 1940, in the skies over southern England. Once the fighting was joined, a pattern emerged that took decades to read correctly. The Hurricane's larger share of the killing was not luck. It came from what the aircraft had been built to do. The thick wing that cost the Hurricane its speed made it a steady gun platform. Its 8 Browning machine guns sat closer to the fuselage than the Spitfires, so their fire converged into a tighter, more concentrated pattern, an advantage that told most against what the Hurricane was most often thrown against: the massed formations of German bombers. A stable aircraft holding a long, punishing burst did more to a Heinkel or a Dornier than a faster one that could not hold its aim. The scorned construction paid a second dividend. Now, a battle-damaged Hurricane could be patched and flown again, while a more complex airframe would have been grounded. So squadrons kept more machines in the fight through weeks of steady losses. In a contest of attrition, the aircraft that came back counted for more than the aircraft that looked modern on the ground. This is also where a durable myth took hold, the tidy notion that Spitfires were assigned to the German fighters while Hurricanes were sent after the bombers. It makes a clean story, and it is largely false. The men who ran the battle, chiefly Air Vice Marshal Keith Park of 11 Group, scrambled squadrons by geography and readiness, whichever unit could reach the raid in time, not by the fighter it flew. That division of labor was written in afterward, a convenience of memory. The record, though, was not made by the airplane alone, and the deadliest squadron in that summer sky was not British. It was number 303, Squadron. Its pilots were Poles, and behind them lay a particular kind of loss. They had watched their own country overrun in September 1939, had flown against the same Luftwaffe with obsolete equipment and lost, and had made their way across a falling Europe to reach Britain and fight again. When they arrived, they were handed the Hurricane, the second-string fighter, the one British pilots did not boast about. They flew it better than almost anyone. Number 303 did not become operational until the end of August 1940. Weeks into the battle, in roughly 6 weeks of combat, it was credited with more enemy aircraft than any other RAF fighter squadron in the entire campaign. Here, the record has to be read with care. The squadron's contemporary tally was 126 kills. Post-war cross-checking against German loss records revised that to about 75 confirmed. Even the corrected figure left it the top-scoring squadron of the battle, with the lowest ratio of losses to victories in fighter command. The reason was partly technique. The Poles were combat veterans who had learned to hold their fire until the enemy filled the windscreen, closing to a range British training called reckless, and at that distance they did not miss. The squadron's leading pilot was not even a Pole. Joseph František was a Czech who chose to fly with them. And with 17 victories, he finished as the highest-scoring Allied pilot of the whole Battle of Britain. The men who directed the battle understood what these squadrons had done. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, who commanded Fighter Command through that summer, wrote afterward that had it not been for the Polish squadrons and their gallantry, he was not prepared to say the outcome of the battle would have been the same. They had helped hold the sky over England in the airplane no one wanted. And that same airplane was about to be sent somewhere far worse than the skies over London. The worst place was the open Atlantic. By 1941, long-range German Condors were hunting the convoys that kept Britain fed, striking far beyond the reach of any airfield. The stopgap answer was brutal in its simplicity. Bolt a catapult to the bow of a merchant ship, loaded with a war-weary Hurricane, often a Battle of Britain veteran near the end of its life, and fling it into the air when a Condor appeared. There was no deck to land on. Once launched, the pilot fought, then bailed out or ditched in the sea and hoped to be picked up. The aircraft was always lost. The airplanes that had held the sky over England were now being thrown away, one flight each, into the North Atlantic. These were not suicide missions, whatever the legend implies. The one-way ticket belonged to the machine, not the man. On the 3rd of August 1941, Lieutenant Robert Everett launched, shot down a Condor, and went into the water so hard he was 30 feet under before he clawed free of the cockpit. He surfaced, was rescued, and received the Distinguished Service Order. The Hurricane went everywhere. The war was hardest. Over the North African desert, the tank-busting Mark IID, its crews called themselves the Flying Tin Openers, dove to within 40 feet of the ground to fire 2 4.0mm cannon into enemy armor and claimed dozens of tanks at El Alamein, though it was always a specialist stopgap, slow and exposed. It defended, besieged Malta. It went to the Soviet Union by the hundreds under Lend-Lease. And in Burma, it met the Japanese and found its limit at last. Outclassed in a turning fight by more agile fighters. By now, the Hurricane had fought on nearly every front the war offered. In nearly every role, a single-engine fighter could be bent to fill, which raises the harder question. If this airplane did so much of the work, why did another get remembered? The answer begins with the obvious. The Spitfire was the more beautiful machine, and it was the faster one, a genuinely superior air superiority fighter, quicker to climb and tighter in a turn. Thanks to the very stressed metal wing the Hurricane lacked, it looked like the future, and it photographed like a legend. When the newsreels needed an image of defiance, They reached for the Spitfire. Even the enemy fed the myth. The story is told that when Hermann Göring asked his commanders what they needed to finish off the RAF, the ace Adolf Galland answered, "Give me a squadron of Spitfires." It is quoted to this day as proof the Spitfire was the better aircraft. It was nothing of the kind. Galland was making a bitter joke at Göring's expense, protesting orders that chained his fast Bf-109s to the bombers as close escort and stripped away their advantages. He still preferred his own Messerschmitt. He wanted the Spitfire's tighter turn only for the defensive role he had wrongly been forced to fly. And here, fairness demands a hard admission. In the pure duel of fighter against fighter, the Spitfire was the better weapon, and its squadrons came home with a higher ratio of victories to losses than the Hurricanes. The legend was not conjured from nothing. It was earned in part. Neither aircraft won that summer alone. It took both the celebrated few and the workmanlike many. So, the real question was never which airplane was better. It is what we mean when we say one of them won, and why winning and being remembered turned out to be two different things. Start with what winning actually required. Air defense is not decided by the finest aircraft. It is decided by how many capable aircraft can meet the enemy on a given morning, and how quickly the ones that fall can be replaced by the next. That is a contest of numbers, of production, of repair, and it was exactly the contest the Hurricane had been built, almost by accident, to win. Recall that reckless bet at the Hawker factory, 1,000 fighters tooled for before a single order came. That was why Fighter Command had enough machines to fill those 32 squadrons when the summer came, and why the Hurricane, not the Spitfire, was there in the numbers that shot down the majority of the German aircraft, destroyed. The obsolete construction that engineers scorned was the same construction that could be built fast and patched faster, keeping worn and wounded airframes in the fight week after grinding week. Every quality that made the Hurricane look like yesterday's airplane was a quality that helped win the battle. This is the hard lesson the record leaves behind, and it runs against everything instinct wants to believe. The most advanced machine is not always the one that matters most. Greatness in war is not the same as superiority on paper. The Spitfire was the better fighter. The Hurricane was the more decisive one, and those are not the same claim. But there is a cost the arithmetic does not show. The airplane that wins by being plentiful, dependable, and cheap earns no legend. Beauty is remembered. Utility is used up and forgotten. The Hurricane did the necessary work, took the heavier losses, carried the larger share of the burden, and precisely because it was ordinary enough to be everywhere, it became invisible. And so the aircraft that had done the most to save Britain began, even before the war was won, to slip quietly out of the nation's memory. There is a fitting image for how it happened. In the summer of 1940, when a burst of cannon fire tore through a Hurricane, the ground crews would lay a fresh piece of fabric over the wound, brush it smooth, and send the airplane back up to fight again. The aircraft was made to be repaired and returned, patched over, and forgotten as anything but ready. History did to the Hurricane what the ground crews did to its fuselage. It smoothed the record over, laid the legend across the gap, and let the plainer truth disappear beneath it. The wound closed, the name faded, and the work it had done went on holding the sky in the memory of another aircraft entirely. That is the whole of it. The obsolete weapon that was written off before it fought, the forgotten victory it carried more of than any machine in the sky, and the stolen legend handed to a more beautiful airplane that could not have won that summer alone. The Hawker Hurricane, the fighter that saved Britain, and let the Spitfire be remembered for it.